A shy maid greeted a billionaire's deaf mum, and her sign language had everyone stunned. She thought it was just another cleaning job, until the moment the quiet old woman dropped her cup, and the maid spoke to her with her hands. The mansion froze. The billionaire stopped in his tracks. No one had seen his mother smile or speak in years. But what started as a miracle soon revealed something darker. Behind those marble walls lies a family ripped apart by silence, and a secret the maid was never meant to uncover. As hearts begin to open, lies start to crack, and one act of kindness could either heal everything or destroy it all. Can one shy woman teach a broken family to listen again before the truth tears them apart? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The morning sun filtered through the grimy windows of Mike's diner, casting long shadows across the checkerboard floor tiles. Eliana Jones wiped down her last table, her movements careful and practiced. The familiar scent of coffee and industrial cleaner clung to her pale blue uniform as she straightened the salt and pepper shakers one final time. "You're sure about leaving early today, honey?" Martha, the head waitress, called from behind the counter. Her weathered face creased with concern. Eliana nodded, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "Yes, Mom. I have that interview I told you about." "Well, good luck then. Heaven knows you deserve something better than this old place." With a grateful smile, Eliana hurried to the back room, gathering her small purse and the folder containing her references. Her heart thumped against her ribs as she checked her watch. 15 minutes to catch the next bus. The Atlanta summer heat hit her like a wall as she pushed through the diner's door. Sweat immediately beaded on her forehead as she half walked, half jogged to the bus stop. The schedule she'd memorized left no room for delay. The bus arrived with a hiss of brakes and a cloud of exhaust. Eliana climbed aboard, dropping her coins into the fare box with trembling fingers. Finding a seat near the middle, she smoothed her skirt and took several deep breaths. "Lord," she whispered, "please help me stay calm." The elite housekeeping agency occupied the 3rd floor of a sleek downtown building. The contrast between the diner's worn linoleum and the agency's polished marble floors made Eliana's shoes feel suddenly shabby. At the reception desk, a perfectly groomed woman directed her to wait in a plush chair. Eliana's fingers worried at the edges of her folder until a door opened and a tall woman in a crisp suit emerged. "Miss Jones, I'm Mrs. Bradford. Please come in." The office was cool and elegant, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Mrs. Bradford settled behind her desk, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed Eliana's application. "Your references from your current employer are quite good," she noted. "Very steady work history. No gaps. That's important to us." "Yes, Ma'am. I believe in being reliable." Mrs. Bradford's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly at Eliana's soft-spoken response. "Our clients expect the highest standards of discretion and professionalism. Many are prominent families who value their privacy." "I understand completely." The interview proceeded with questions about experience, availability, and attention to detail. Eliana answered each one carefully, her grandmother's voice echoing in her memory. "Speak truth, child, but speak it gentle." Then came the question about special skills. Eliana hesitated, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Well, I know American Sign Language. My grandmother was deaf and she raised me after my parents passed. She taught me from when I was very young." Mrs. Bradford's pen paused mid-note. "Sign language? That's unusual." She made another notation, her expression thoughtful. The rest of the interview passed in a blur. By the time Eliana stepped back onto the street, her legs felt wobbly with relief that it was over. She had done her best. Now it was in God's hands. The afternoon crawled by as she waited for news. When her phone finally rang, she nearly dropped it in her haste to answer. "Miss Jones, this is Mrs. Bradford. I'm pleased to inform you that we have a position available immediately. It's a very specific situation, a private estate outside the city. The client has particular needs. Your skill with sign language could be especially valuable." Eliana's heart leapt. "Thank you. Yes, I'm definitely interested." "Excellent. The position includes room and board, plus a very generous salary." Mrs. Bradford named a figure that made Eliana's eyes widen. "Can you start tomorrow?" "Yes, absolutely." After receiving detailed directions, Eliana spent the rest of the afternoon packing her few belongings into 2 worn suitcases. Her tiny apartment had never felt so small as it did now, knowing she would soon leave it behind. The next evening found her on another bus, this one heading out of the city. As Atlanta's skyline receded in the distance, the landscape gradually transformed into rolling countryside. Trees lined the winding road, their branches creating shifting patterns of shadow and light. Eliana pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching the scenery slip by. Her grandmother had always said that God's timing was perfect, even when we couldn't understand it. The memory of those gnarled hands forming the signs for trust and patience brought tears to her eyes. The bus driver called out her stop, and Eliana gathered her belongings. She stood for a moment on the quiet country road, taking in the enormous wrought-iron gates before her. Beyond them, a tree-lined drive disappeared into carefully manicured grounds. The gate's intercom crackled to life when she pressed the button. After identifying herself, the heavy gates swung open with a soft whir. Eliana picked up her suitcases and began walking up the drive, each step carrying her further from her old life. The Hale mansion slowly came into view, a magnificent Georgian-style home with tall white columns and graceful proportions. In the gathering dusk, warm light spilled from several windows, creating golden rectangles on the manicured lawn. Eliana paused at the bottom of the broad stone steps leading to the front door. Setting down her suitcases, she closed her eyes and folded her hands. "Lord," she whispered, her voice barely disturbing the evening quiet. "Whatever purpose you have for me here, help me to serve it well." The porch light flickered on, as if in answer to her prayer. Drawing a deep breath, Eliana picked up her suitcases and climbed the steps, ready to begin this new chapter of her life. The heavy mahogany door swung open at Eliana's knock, revealing a tall, thin woman with steel-grey hair pulled into a severe bun. Her crisp black suit and pearl necklace spoke of rigid precision. "Miss Jones, I presume. I am Marjorie Kent, the house manager." Her voice matched her appearance, cool and meticulously controlled. "You're 3 minutes early. Good. Punctuality is essential here." Eliana stepped into a soaring marble foyer that made her feel impossibly small. "Thank you for... Your belongings will be taken to your quarters." Marjorie interrupted, gesturing to a waiting footman. "Follow me. We'll begin the tour immediately." Their footsteps echoed through vast hallways, the sound bouncing off marble floors and high ceilings. The walls were lined with photographs in ornate golden frames, moments frozen in time of a happier era. Eliana caught glimpses as they walked. A distinguished-looking man at a piano, a beautiful woman in an evening gown beside him, a young boy with serious eyes. "The main wing consists of 12 rooms," Marjorie announced, her heels clicking against the floor. "You'll be responsible for the east section, including Mrs. Hale's private quarters." She paused, turning to fix Eliana with a sharp look. "I should warn you, Mrs. Hale is particular. She's been deaf for 11 years now. Refuses most help. The last 3 maids quit within a month." Eliana nodded, absorbing this information as they passed more photographs. The same family, but the images grew more recent, the boy now a teenager, then a young man in graduation robes. The woman appeared less frequently until she disappeared altogether. "Mr. Samuel Hale owns the estate," Marjorie continued. "He's quite successful, one of the youngest billionaires in tech, but he's rarely here." Her tone carried a hint of disapproval. "His mother lives alone in the East Wing. She hasn't played since the accident." "Played?" Eliana asked softly. "Mrs. Hale was a concert pianist, quite famous in her day. The accident that took her hearing, well, it took her husband too." Marjorie's voice dropped. "Mr. Jonathan Hale's car went off the road during a storm. Mrs. Hale was with him. She survived, but—" She made a vague gesture toward her ears. They entered a magnificent parlor where sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows. At its center stood a gleaming black grand piano, its surface reflecting the afternoon light like still water. Eliana noticed the keyboard cover was down, and despite the room's immaculate condition, there was something unutterably sad about that silent instrument. "You'll dust in here daily," Marjorie instructed, "but never touch the piano keys. Mrs. Hale is very particular about that." She checked her watch. "I have other matters to attend to. Begin with this room. Jenkins will show you to your quarters later." Left alone, Eliana moved carefully through the space, feather duster in hand. The piano drew her attention again and again. Its closed lid reminded her of shut eyes, as though it were sleeping or weeping. She noticed that while dust gathered on the lid, the area around the keys was spotless, as though someone regularly cleaned there but never dared to lift the cover. A soft shuffling sound from above made her pause. Through the ceiling's ornate medallion, she could hear careful footsteps moving across the upper floor. Something about their hesitant rhythm tugged at her heart. Before she quite knew what she was doing, Eliana found herself climbing the grand staircase. The upper hallway was darker, lined with heavy curtains and more photographs. These showed only the woman, Mrs. Hale, seated at various pianos, her face alive with music. The shuffling led her to a partially open door. Warm afternoon light spilled out, along with the scent of lavender tea. Eliana hesitated, then gently pushed the door wider. The study was smaller than the rooms downstairs, but somehow more alive. Books filled floor-to-ceiling shelves, and comfortable chairs were arranged near large windows overlooking the gardens. Near one window sat an elderly woman in a pale blue dress, her silver hair elegantly styled. She was reaching for a teacup when Eliana's movement caught her eye. Mrs. Hale turned sharply, startled by the unexpected presence. The sudden motion made her teacup wobble precariously on its saucer. Eliana froze, knowing she had overstepped, but unable to simply back away. Something in the older woman's face, a mixture of surprise, wariness, and deep loneliness, struck a chord in her heart. Without thinking, Eliana's hands moved in the familiar patterns her grandmother had taught her. "Are you all right, Mom?" The teacup slipped from Mrs. Hale's fingers, clattering against its saucer. Her eyes widened, and her hands trembled as she raised them to respond. "You understand me?" The signs were slightly rusty but clear, the movements of someone who had once been fluent but had few opportunities to practice. Tears welled in Mrs. Hale's eyes, and Eliana took an instinctive step forward. A commotion at the door made them both turn. Marjorie stood there, her face a mask of shock. Behind her was a tall man in an expensive suit, Samuel Hale himself, apparently having arrived unannounced. His expression shifted from surprise to confusion as he took in the scene. His mother with tears on her cheeks, the new maid with her hands still raised in mid-sign, the trembling teacup on its saucer. The moment stretched between them like a thread about to snap. Then Mrs. Hale's hands moved again, slow but deliberate. "Please, stay." And in that quiet room, with sunlight streaming through the windows and dust motes dancing in the air, something long frozen began to thaw. Morning light crept through the mansion's tall windows, painting golden rectangles across the marble floors. But unlike most mornings, the usual hush was broken by urgent whispers and hurried footsteps. The news spread from servant to servant like ripples in a still pond. Mrs. Hale had spoken, well, signed, for the first time in years. In the kitchen, the cook paused while kneading bread dough. "Are you certain?" she asked the gardener, who had heard it from the butler, who had witnessed it himself. "Clear as day." The gardener nodded. "That new maid, the quiet one, she knows sign language. Made Mrs. Hale cry, they say." Eliana tried to ignore the whispers as she went about her morning duties, focusing instead on the careful folding of fresh linens. Her hands moved methodically, but her mind kept returning to Mrs. Hale's face yesterday. That moment of recognition, of connection breaking through years of isolation. The mansion's peaceful morning routine shattered when the front door burst open. Samuel Hale strode in, his expensive suit slightly rumpled from what must have been a hasty return flight. His presence filled the foyer like a storm cloud. "Where is she?" His voice echoed off the marble. "The new maid. Where is she?" Eliana's hands trembled as she set down her cleaning rag. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out from the linen closet into the grand foyer. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows above, casting colourful shadows across the floor between them. Samuel Hale was taller in person than he appeared in the photographs lining the halls. His dark hair was slightly dishevelled, as if he'd been running his fingers through it in agitation. He studied her with intense eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail of her appearance, from her simple uniform to her nervously clasped hands. "You're the one?" he asked, his tone a mixture of disbelief and something harder to read. "You're the one who got through to my mother?" Eliana nodded, finding her voice. "Yes, sir, I know sign language. My grandmother was deaf." "And you just happened to be assigned here?" There was skepticism in his voice, an edge of suspicion that made Eliana's chest tight. "I mentioned it during my interview with the agency," she explained softly. "I didn't know about Mrs. Hale's condition until I arrived." Before Samuel could respond, there was movement on the grand staircase. Nora Hale descended slowly, her elegant bearing unchanged from her concert days. Her hands moved in graceful signs. "Samuel, you're home early." Samuel's expression softened slightly as he turned to his mother, though his hands remained stiffly at his sides. Eliana automatically translated. "He seems to have heard about our conversation yesterday, Mrs. Hale." Nora's face brightened. She signed again, and Eliana translated. "Then you must join us for lunch, both of you." Samuel opened his mouth as if to protest, but something in his mother's expression made him pause. He nodded instead, though tension still lined his shoulders. The dining room was a study in controlled opulence, with heavy silk curtains and a table that could seat 20, but was set for only 3. Eliana felt out of place in her work uniform, but Nora had insisted. She sat beside the older woman, across from Samuel, whose attention seemed divided between his mother's hands and Eliana's translations. Nora's hands moved deliberately. "We should say grace." Eliana translated, then watched as Nora's fingers danced through a prayer of gratitude, for food, for family, for new beginnings. As she spoke the words aloud, she saw Samuel's throat work, his eyes growing suspiciously bright. How long had it been since he'd heard his mother's prayers? The meal passed in a strange dance of signs, spoken words, and careful glances. Nora asked about Samuel's business trip, and he answered in short sentences that Eliana translated into flowing signs. Gradually, the stiffness in his shoulders eased as he watched his mother's animated responses. The garden roses are blooming early this year. Nora signed, and Eliana spoke the words softly. Perhaps we could walk there after lunch? Samuel checked his phone, frowning. I have calls. But Nora was already standing, her face set with gentle determination. Samuel's resistance crumbled like sugar in rain. Perhaps for a few minutes. He conceded. Eliana began clearing the plates, but Nora's hand on her arm stopped her. Please join us. She signed. I need your voice. The afternoon sun had warmed the garden paths, releasing the sweet scent of roses into the air. Eliana walked slightly behind mother and son, translating their halting conversation. She noticed how Samuel would start to sign something, then stop, his hands falling helplessly to his sides. You remember when you were small? Nora signed. You would hide among these bushes during hide and seek? A ghost of a smile touched Samuel's lips. Father always pretended he couldn't find me, even though my shoes were sticking out. For a moment, grief shadowed both their faces at the mention of Jonathan Hale, but Nora's hands kept moving, kept reaching across the silence, and slowly, story by story, memory by memory, something long frozen began to thaw. As evening approached, Eliana retired to her quarters, a small but comfortable room in the servants' wing. She sat on her bed, her well-worn Bible open in her lap, but her eyes kept drifting to the window. Somewhere in the great house, she could imagine Samuel standing outside his mother's door, listening to the soft sounds of laughter that had been absent for so long. She ran her fingers over the Bible's familiar pages, finding comfort in the worn leather binding. The verse her eyes fell upon seemed particularly fitting. For you shall go out in joy, and be led forth in peace. Through her open window she could hear the evening birds singing in the garden, where mother and son had walked together that afternoon. Their song seemed to carry a promise of more days like this one, more bridges built across the silence, more healing yet to come. As spring deepened into summer, life at the Hale mansion fell into a gentle rhythm, like music flowing from the grand piano that now stood uncovered in the sunlit parlor. Each morning, Eliana would find Nora already awake, waiting by the piano with a soft smile that had become familiar and dear. Their morning ritual began with Eliana carefully dusting the gleaming black surface, paying special attention to the ivory keys that Nora's fingers had once danced across in concert halls. The older woman would watch with quiet appreciation, occasionally reaching out to touch a key, as if remembering a melody only she could hear. My husband insisted on having it tuned every month. Nora signed one morning, her movements graceful despite her age. He said music deserved perfect pitch. Eliana translated the signs into spoken words, though no one else was there to hear them. It had become her habit to voice everything Nora signed, a bridge between silence and sound. The afternoons found them in the garden, where summer roses climbed trellises in shades of pink and white. They would walk slowly along the gravel paths, Eliana learning the signs for different flowers while teaching Nora modern expressions she'd missed in her years of isolation. LOL, Eliana signed one day, spelling it out before showing the actual sign. It means laugh out loud. Nora's face crinkled with amusement as she copied the gesture. Her next signs were playful. In my day, we just laughed. During their evening sessions by the fireplace, Eliana would read aloud from whatever book Nora had chosen, everything from classic poetry to modern novels. Her hands would move in time with her voice, signing each word so Nora could follow both the story and its sounds. Sometimes Nora would close her eyes, her expression peaceful as she absorbed the double language of voice and gesture. It was during one of these fireside sessions that Nora decided to share her own gift. She led Eliana to the piano, patting the bench beside her. With infinite patience, she guided Eliana's fingers over the keys, teaching her simple melodies. Though she couldn't hear them, notes, her muscle memory was perfect, and soon "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star" filled the room. Samuel would appear at unexpected moments, watching from doorways or through windows, his expression a complex mixture of wonder and unease. Eliana would catch glimpses of him, standing in the garden while they walked, or pausing outside the parlor during piano lessons. He seemed drawn to these moments, yet unable to participate, like a moth circling a flame. One afternoon, as thunder rumbled in the distance, Nora's hands moved with unusual urgency. "He needs to learn. Will you teach him?" Eliana's heart skipped. "Mr. Hale, I don't know if he'd want that." "Please," Nora signed. "He's my son. I need him to understand me without a translator." That evening, Eliana gathered her courage during dinner service. Samuel was eating alone, as he often did, focused on his phone while picking at his grilled salmon. "Mr. Hale." Her voice was soft but steady. "Your mother has a request." He looked up, one eyebrow raised. "Yes?" She'd like you to learn sign language. I could teach you if you'd like." Samuel's chuckle was dry, almost defensive. "Miss Jones, I run a global company. I barely have time to sleep, let alone learn a new language." "It wouldn't have to be much." Eliana persisted gently. "Just the basics. Even a few signs would mean so much to her." "Thank you, but no." His tone was final as he returned to his phone. Eliana nodded and withdrew, her heart heavy. Later that night, while straightening the parlor, she left Nora's old songbook open on the piano. The pages fell naturally to "Amazing Grace," and Eliana carefully placed her handwritten notes in the margins, simple diagrams showing the signs for key words in the hymn. The next morning, as Eliana served breakfast, heavy footsteps approached the dining room. Samuel appeared in the doorway, his usual confident stride somewhat hesitant. He stood for a moment, watching his mother butter her toast, then raised his hands in careful, awkward movements. "Good morning, Mother." The signs were clumsy, unpracticed, but unmistakable. Nora's fork clattered to her plate, her face transformed with joy, years seeming to fall away as she beamed at her son. Her hands flew in excited response, too quick for Samuel to follow, but he smiled anyway, a real smile that reached his eyes. Eliana felt warmth spread through her chest as she watched mother and son attempt to communicate in this new way. She bit her lip to hold back her own smile, but it broke through anyway, as bright as the morning sun streaming through the windows. Nora's hands moved again, slower this time, and Samuel looked to Eliana for help. "She says she can teach you the rest." Eliana translated softly. "If you'll let her." Samuel's eyes met his mother's, and he nodded once, decisively. "I'd like that." He signed carefully, looking to Eliana for confirmation that he'd done it correctly. She nodded encouragingly, and for a moment the breakfast room felt like holy ground, a place where miracles, small but significant, could unfold over coffee and toast, between stumbling signs and radiant smiles. The morning light caught the tears in Nora's eyes, making them sparkle like diamonds as she watched her son attempt another sign. Outside, birds sang in the garden, their melody a perfect accompaniment to this quiet breakthrough, this gentle awakening of hope in the house that had been silent for so long. Spring arrived at the Hale mansion in gentle waves of warmth and color. The gardens burst with new life, daffodils nodding their golden heads, cherry blossoms dusting the paths with pale pink petals, and tender green shoots pushing through rich soil. Inside, another kind of renewal was taking place, just as delicate and hopeful. The kitchen became their sanctuary in the afternoons. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, creating pools of warmth on the marble countertops where they gathered. Nora insisted on using the kitchen rather than the formal dining room. It reminded her of happier times, she explained through graceful hand movements that Eliana translated for Samuel. On this particular afternoon, Nora was teaching them both to make her famous lemon squares, her hands moving with practiced precision as she demonstrated the proper way to zest a lemon. Samuel watched intently, his own attempts clumsy but earnest. When he accidentally sprayed lemon juice across the counter, Nora's silent laughter lit up her entire face. "Your father was just as hopeless in the kitchen," she signed, and Eliana translated softly. "Remember the Christmas he tried to make gingerbread cookies?" Samuel's smile faltered slightly, but he nodded. "They were black as coal." He signed back, his movements becoming more confident with each passing day. Nora's eyes sparkled with memory as her hands flew through the air. He set off every smoke alarm in the house, but he was so proud that he'd tried. She paused, her expression growing wistful. He never gave up on anything he started. These storytelling sessions had become a daily ritual. Nora would share tales from her youth, about meeting Samuel's father at a piano recital, about their early married years, about Samuel's childhood. Her hands would dance with enthusiasm, painting pictures in the air of moments long past. Samuel seemed to drink in these stories, though sometimes pain flickered across his face when memories cut too close to the bone. Eliana noticed how he would grip his coffee cup tighter or fidget with his expensive watch during these moments, but he never asked his mother to stop. One sunny afternoon, they moved their session to the garden. Nora had insisted on showing them how to properly prune the rose bushes, another skill she'd learned from her own mother. The three of them knelt in the soft earth, with Nora demonstrating the correct angle for each cut. The elderly woman's hands suddenly stilled, and she turned to Eliana with an expression that made the young woman's heart skip. Her fingers began moving slowly, deliberately, in a way that seemed heavy with importance. "He doesn't know the truth about his father's death." Eliana's breath caught in her throat. Samuel had wandered a few feet away, examining a particularly thorny branch, oblivious to this sudden shift in conversation. Nora's hands continued moving, urgency in every gesture. "He thinks I shut him out by choice, that I abandoned him when he needed me most." Her fingers trembled slightly as she formed the next signs. "But I had a stroke that night, the same night his father died. That's how I lost my hearing." Eliana glanced at Samuel, still focused on the roses, then back to Nora. The older woman's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I couldn't bear to tell him," Nora signed. "I was so ashamed, so lost in grief. How could I explain that in the moment he needed his mother most, I couldn't even hear his voice?" Her hands fell still for a moment before adding, "By the time I learned to sign, the distance between us was too great. He had built walls I couldn't breach." Eliana reached out and squeezed Nora's soil-stained hands. "Let me help," she signed. "It's not too late for healing." Nora's smile was tremulous but grateful. "You've already brought so much light back into this house." She signed. "I never dreamed I would hear my son's laughter again, even if only through my eyes." That evening, after helping Nora prepare for bed, Eliana found herself standing outside Samuel's office. Light spilled from beneath the door, along with the soft sound of typing. She knocked gently. "Come in," his voice called. The office was a masterpiece of modern design, all clean lines and rich leather, with floor-to-ceiling windows that now reflected the room's warm lighting against the growing darkness outside. Samuel sat behind an imposing desk, his laptop casting a blue glow across his features. "Mr. Hale," Eliana began softly. "Could we talk for a moment?" About your father." The typing stopped abruptly. Samuel's fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long moment before he slowly closed the laptop. When he looked up, his expression was carefully controlled, but Eliana could see the pain underneath. "What about him?" His voice was flat, defensive. "I've noticed how much it means to your mother to share stories about him," Eliana said gently. "But I can see it's difficult for you." Samuel's jaw tightened. "The past is the past, Miss Jones. Some things are better left there. Sometimes the past needs to be faced before we can move forward," she suggested quietly. He stood up suddenly, walking to the window. "She stopped listening," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's all I needed to know." His reflection in the glass showed eyes filled with old hurt. "When Dad died, I needed her. But she just disappeared into herself. Wouldn't speak, wouldn't respond. Just sat there, staring into nothing." Eliana's heart ached with the weight of what she knew, but she recognized that this wasn't her truth to tell. This revelation needed to come from Nora herself when the time was right. Rain began to tap against the windows, a gentle percussion that filled the heavy silence. Samuel continued staring out into the darkness, his shoulders rigid with tension. "Thank you for your concern, Miss Jones," he said finally, his professional mask sliding back into place. "But I have work to finish." Eliana nodded and quietly left the office. She made her way to her small quarters, where the rain provided a soothing backdrop to her troubled thoughts. Sitting by her window, she watched water trails make abstract patterns on the glass and did what she always did when faced with problems too big for her to solve alone. She prayed. "Lord," she whispered, "give me the wisdom to help heal this family. Give me the words to bridge this gap, and please give them both the strength to face the truth when it comes." The rain continued its gentle symphony as Eliana remained by the window, her heart full of hope for the healing that she believed, she had to believe, was possible. In the quiet of her room, she could almost feel God's presence, as tangible as the spring air that had filled the garden earlier that day, promising new growth, new beginnings, and the possibility of restoration. The following week brought subtle changes to the Hale mansion's routine. Every morning after breakfast, Samuel would appear in the sunlit conservatory, his tablet forgotten on a nearby table, ready for his sign language practice with Eliana. "Like this?" Samuel asked, his fingers fumbling through the alphabet. His normally confident demeanor gave way to an endearing awkwardness as he tried to shape each letter correctly. "Almost," Eliana said softly. She demonstrated again, her movements fluid and natural. "The R needs to cross here, see?" She shaped his fingers gently, trying to ignore the warmth that spread through her at the brief contact. Samuel's brow furrowed in concentration as he copied her movement. "It's harder than it looks," he admitted, a hint of frustration in his voice. "I don't know how you make it seem so effortless." "Years of practice," Eliana smiled encouragingly. "And your mother is an excellent teacher too." At the mention of Nora, Samuel's expression softened slightly. "She seems different lately, more present." Their lessons gradually extended beyond their scheduled time. Samuel would ask questions about deaf culture, about Eliana's grandmother, about the subtle nuances of facial expressions in signing. Sometimes he would just watch her hands move, mesmerized by the grace of her gestures. The afternoons belonged to music. Nora had begun spending more time at the grand piano, her fingers remembering paths they had traveled thousands of times before. Though she couldn't hear the notes, her muscle memory was flawless, and her face would light up with joy as she played. One particularly sunny afternoon, Eliana sat beside Nora at the piano, watching as the older woman opened a weathered hymnal to Amazing Grace. The familiar notes filled the room as Nora's fingers danced across the keys, while Eliana signed the lyrics with careful precision. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. Her hands moved through the air, telling the story of redemption and hope. Nora watched intently, her own fingers never missing a note despite her focus on Eliana's signs. A deep voice joined in from the doorway. Samuel stood there, leaning against the frame, humming the melody softly. His eyes met Eliana's for a moment, and something passed between them, a shared understanding of the miracle unfolding in this room. Nora beamed at her son's presence, her fingers continuing their dance across the ivory keys. The sunlight streaming through the tall windows created a golden halo around them all, as if blessing this moment of connection. Day after day, the ritual continued. The piano that had stood silent for so long became the heart of the house again. Nora taught Eliana simple melodies, guiding her hands across the keys with patient instruction, while Eliana taught them both new songs to sign. This one speaks of hope, Eliana would sign, introducing a contemporary worship song. Nora's eyes would light up with interest, eager to learn something new, while Samuel watched from his increasingly regular spot by the door. One evening, after a particularly moving session of music and signing, Samuel caught up with Eliana as she was preparing to leave the parlor. "Miss Jones," he called out softly, "could you stay a moment?" Eliana turned, her heart picking up speed slightly at his serious expression. "Of course, Mr. Hale." He gestured for her to sit in one of the plush armchairs while he remained standing, his tall frame silhouetted against the evening light. "I wanted to thank you," he began, his voice unusually gentle. "What you've done here. For my mother." He paused, searching for words. "It's my pleasure," Eliana started to say, but he held up a hand. "Please, let me finish." He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of vulnerability. "You've given my mother something I couldn't. For years I tried to reach her through lawyers, doctors, specialists, but you—" He shook his head in wonder. "You reached her with kindness and patience. You've brought music back into her life, into this house." Eliana felt her cheeks warm at his words. "Your mother never stopped loving music," she said softly. "Or you. Sometimes people just need a different way to show it." Samuel's eyes met hers, and for a moment the usual guardedness was gone, replaced by something softer, more vulnerable. "Thank you," he said simply, but the words carried the weight of years of worry and gratitude. As Eliana made her way toward her quarters, her cheeks still flushed from the interaction, she didn't notice the slight movement at the top of the stairs. There, through a cracked door, Nora watched the exchange between her son and the young woman who had brought light back into their lives. Her eyes held a tender, knowing look, recognizing something that perhaps neither Samuel nor Eliana had fully admitted to themselves yet. The gentle notes of Amazing Grace seemed to linger in the air, a reminder of the day's earlier harmony. In the growing dusk, the mansion felt different than it had just a week ago, warmer, more alive, as if the music and signing had awakened something long dormant within its walls. Upstairs, Nora's smile remained as she watched Eliana disappear down the hallway. Her hands moved in a simple prayer of gratitude, thanking God for sending this quiet soul who was helping to heal their broken family. One sign, one song, one moment at a time. Sunday morning arrived with golden rays piercing through wisps of early fog around the Hale mansion. The dew still clung to the manicured lawns as Eliana helped Nora prepare for what would be her first church service in over a decade. Nora's hands trembled slightly as she fastened her pearl necklace, a gift from her late husband. Eliana stood behind her, helping to smooth down the elegant navy dress that hadn't seen daylight in years. "Are you sure about this?" Eliana signed, catching Nora's eye in the mirror. Nora's response was immediate and firm. "Yes, it's time." Her fingers moved with determination. "God has given me back my voice through these hands. I want to use them to praise him." Downstairs, Samuel paced the foyer in his crisp charcoal suit, checking his watch repeatedly. When the two women descended the grand staircase, he stopped mid-stride, struck by the sight of his mother looking more like her old self than he'd seen in years. The drive to church was quiet, but charged with anticipation. The small stone chapel stood bathed in morning light, its stained glass windows throwing rainbow patterns across the steps. As they entered, heads turned. Many remembered Nora Hale from years ago, when she would play the organ for special services. Eliana guided them to a pew near the front, positioning herself between mother and son. As the first hymn began, she lifted her hands and began to sign the familiar words. Beside her, Nora's hands rose too, moving in perfect sync with the music. Amazing grace! How sweet the sound! They signed together, and Nora's face glowed with joy. Samuel watched, transfixed, as his mother worshipped freely for the first time since losing her hearing. The congregation couldn't help but stare. Some wiped away tears at the sight of Nora Hale, once known for her musical gift, now making music with her hands instead of a piano. Even the choir seemed moved, their voices swelling with extra emotion. After the service, Pastor Greg approached their pew, his warm smile reaching his eyes. "Mrs. Hale," he signed and spoke simultaneously. "It brings such joy to see you here today." He turned to include Samuel and Eliana in his greeting. "We're planning our annual charity gala for the hearing impaired next month. Would you consider sharing your story with our community?" Nora's hands stilled for a moment as she considered the request. Then she signed, "Only if Eliana will interpret for me." Eliana's eyes widened in surprise, but before she could respond, Samuel spoke up. "Of course she will. We'll make all the necessary arrangements." The drive home was filled with animated signing between Nora and Eliana, discussing plans for the gala. Samuel watched through the rearview mirror, a small smile playing at his lips. Back at the mansion, the news spread quickly. Marjorie, who usually maintained a cool, professional distance, actually smiled when she heard about Nora's upcoming speech. "I'll arrange for the finest caterers," she declared, her efficiency taking on an almost enthusiastic edge. Samuel immediately made calls to his personal tailor, insisting on new formal wear for all three of them. "Mother should look her absolute best," he said, his tone brooking no argument about the expense. As evening settled over the estate, Eliana sought refuge on the veranda, needing a moment to process the day's events. The spring air carried the sweet scent of blooming jasmine, and crickets had begun their nightly chorus. She didn't hear Samuel approach until he spoke softly. "Tea?" He held out a delicate china cup, steam rising in the cool evening air. "Thank you," she murmured, accepting the offering. He settled into the chair beside her, loosening his tie slightly. The silence between them felt comfortable, filled with the gentle sounds of nature. Finally, Samuel spoke, his voice quiet but clear in the evening stillness. "I was married once," he said, staring out at the darkening gardens. "Her name was Rebecca. She loved gardens like these." He paused, taking a slow breath. "We lost her to cancer 5 years ago. It was quick, too quick." Eliana remained silent, sensing he needed to continue. "After that, I threw myself into work, built my company into what it is today. But I also built walls." He turned slightly toward her. I convinced myself that's what strength looked like. Being hard, untouchable. I was so wrong. His fingers traced the rim of his teacup. When my father died and Mother stopped communicating, I took it as another abandonment. I never knew about the stroke, never understood why she withdrew. I just added another brick to my wall. The confession hung in the air between them, weighted with years of unspoken pain and regret. Eliana set her cup down gently. Sometimes, she said softly, what we think is strength is actually fear wearing a mask. Real strength is having the courage to be vulnerable again. Samuel's eyes met hers, and in the fading light, she could see the mixture of respect and something deeper, something tender in his gaze. You've taught us both about that kind of strength, he said quietly. They sat together as twilight deepened into night, sharing the comfortable silence of two people who no longer needed words to understand each other. The mansion behind them glowed warmly, transformed from a house of silence into a home filled with new possibilities. The teacups grew cold, forgotten, as they talked about small things and big things, favorite books, childhood memories, hopes for the future. Their conversation flowed easily, punctuated by gentle laughter and thoughtful pauses, each moment building a bridge between their two worlds. Above them, from her bedroom window, Nora watched her son and the young woman who had brought such change to their lives. Her heart swelled with gratitude, recognizing in their quiet companionship the first stirrings of something beautiful and unexpected, a gift of grace none of them had seen coming. The gala transformed the Hale mansion into a glittering wonderland. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over fresh flower arrangements that filled the grand ballroom with the sweet scent of roses and lilies. Elegant tables draped in cream-colored linens circled a gleaming wooden dance floor, while delicate champagne flutes sparkled like scattered diamonds. Upstairs, Eliana stood before her mirror, smoothing the midnight blue gown Samuel had insisted on having made for her. The silk rustled softly as she practiced the speech translations one final time, her hands moving with graceful precision. A gentle knock interrupted her rehearsal. "Come in," she called, turning to find Nora in the doorway, resplendent in a flowing silver gown that caught the light with every movement. Her snow-white hair was elegantly styled, and a simple pearl necklace graced her neck. "You look beautiful," Eliana signed, her smile genuine and warm. Nora's hands moved in response. "As do you, my dear. Are you nervous?" "A little," Eliana admitted, both speaking and signing. "But your story deserves to be told perfectly." Nora crossed the room and took Eliana's hands in hers. Her fingers squeezed gently, conveying more than words could express. Below, the sound of arriving guests filtered up through the floorboards. Samuel waited at the foot of the grand staircase, cutting a striking figure in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. His breath caught slightly as Eliana and his mother descended together, their arms linked in mutual support. The sight of them, his mother radiating quiet dignity, Eliana glowing with gentle grace, stirred something profound in his heart. The ballroom quickly filled with Atlanta's elite, a sea of designer gowns and custom suits. Waiters glided between clusters of guests, offering champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. Soft classical music provided an elegant backdrop to the gentle murmur of conversation. Marjorie moved efficiently through the crowd, directing staff and ensuring everything ran smoothly. Her dark green dress was conservative, yet fashionable, and her smile remained fixed and professional. But her eyes followed Eliana's every movement with an unreadable expression. As the evening progressed, the master of ceremonies approached the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried clearly through the room, "please welcome Mrs. Nora Hale and her interpreter, Miss Eliana Jones. The room hushed as Nora and Eliana made their way to the stage. Under the soft spotlight, Nora's silver gown seemed to shimmer like starlight. She took a deep breath, her hands rising to begin her story as Eliana's clear voice gave sound to her silent words. 10 years ago. Eliana translated, her voice carrying the emotion in Nora's gestures. I lost 2 things precious to me: my beloved husband and my ability to hear. The stroke that took my hearing came the very night he died, a double darkness that seemed impossible to bear. The audience was completely still, captivated by the raw honesty in Nora's signing and Eliana's gentle voice. I withdrew from the world, from my son, believing I had nothing left to give. But God had other plans. Nora's hands moved with increasing confidence. He sent an angel disguised as a humble maid who showed me that hearing isn't with ears, it's with love. In the front row, Samuel leaned forward, his eyes never leaving the stage as his mother continued. Through her, I learned that silence doesn't mean solitude, that loss doesn't define us, and that it's never too late for new beginnings. She helped rebuild the bridge between my son and me, teaching us both that sometimes the loudest messages come through silent hands and open hearts. Tears glistened in many eyes throughout the room as Nora concluded her speech. Tonight, we gather to support those who live in silence. But I stand here to testify that silence need not mean isolation. Love speaks in many languages. We need only the courage to learn them. The applause was thunderous. Camera flashes illuminated the room as Nora and Eliana embraced on stage. Samuel made his way forward, enveloping both women in a tight hug, unashamed of the tears that tracked down his cheeks. As the evening shifted to dancing, the orchestra struck up a gentle waltz. Samuel approached Eliana, who stood watching couples twirl across the floor. "May I have this dance?" he asked, extending his hand. Eliana hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. "I should warn you, I'm not very practiced at this." "Neither am I," he admitted with a soft chuckle. "We can be unpracticed together." They moved slowly, finding their rhythm in the music. Samuel's hand was warm against her back, and their steps, though simple, carried them in perfect synchronization. The moment felt suspended in time, intimate despite the crowded room. "Thank you," Samuel murmured, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "For everything you've done for my family. For me." Eliana looked up, meeting his gaze. The tenderness she found there made her heart skip a beat. "Your family has given me so much more," she replied softly. From her table, Nora watched them dance, a knowing smile playing across her face. When the song ended and they returned to her table, she didn't hesitate to sign teasingly to her son. "She's good for you, Samuel." A blush colored his cheeks as he signed back, speaking the words aloud. "Maybe she's good for us all." The night continued with laughter and joy, the mansion alive with music and celebration. Yet, in a quiet corner, unnoticed by the revelers, Marjorie sat at a small desk in the library. Her fingers moved swiftly over her phone's keyboard, composing an email to a local reporter. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she attached documents about Eliana's past, hit send, and slipped the phone back into her clutch. She returned to the party, her smile never wavering as she directed the cleanup crew, while the email traveled through cyberspace, carrying its potential for destruction. The gala wound down as guests began to depart, leaving behind empty champagne glasses and echoes of laughter. Nora, Samuel, and Eliana stood in the foyer, bidding farewell to the last guests, their happiness unmarred by any knowledge of the shadow lurking on the horizon. The morning after the gala dawned grey and cold, a stark contrast to the previous evening's warmth. Eliana was arranging fresh flowers in the kitchen when she heard the sharp click of Marjorie's heels approaching. The house manager's face wore an expression that made Eliana's stomach twist. "Miss Jones." Marjorie's voice was clipped, professional. "Mr. Hale requires your presence in his office. Immediately." The walk to Samuel's office felt endless. Through the tall windows, storm clouds gathered, casting shadows across the marble floors. When Eliana entered, Samuel stood with his back to her, staring at his computer screen. The tension in his shoulders was visible even from across the room. "Close the door," he said, his voice unnaturally controlled. On his desk, a tablet displayed the headline that would shatter everything. "Billionaire's Maid tied to scandal at deaf children's school?" Beneath it, Eliana's old staff photo stared back at her, alongside allegations that made her blood run cold. Her hands began to shake as she read further. The article claimed she had misappropriated funds meant for deaf children's educational programs, describing her departure from the school as sudden and suspicious. Every word was a twisted version of the truth, but the damage was already spreading across social media. "Is this true?" Samuel turned to face her, his eyes hard with something that looked too much like betrayal. "Did you steal from deaf children?" "No." Eliana's voice cracked. "Samuel, please let me explain. Those accusations were proven false, but by then what?" He cut her off, his tone sharp as broken glass. "By then you'd already moved on to your next target? Was that us? Was any of this real?" Tears welled in Eliana's eyes. "How can you ask that? Everything I've done here has been genuine. I would never—" "You worked with deaf children before," he continued, pacing now. "You knew exactly how to get close to my mother, didn't you? To gain her trust and mine." "That's not fair," Eliana whispered, her chest tight with pain. "I loved working with those children. The investigation cleared me completely, but the damage to my reputation was already done. I left to protect the school from further scandal." A knock at the door interrupted them. Nora entered, her face concerned as she took in the scene before her. She must have sensed the tension, because her hands flew into rapid signs. "What's happening?" Eliana translated automatically, her voice trembling. Samuel grabbed the tablet, showing his mother the article. Nora's eyes narrowed as she read. Then she began signing furiously. Eliana's hands fell to her sides, unable to translate the words meant for her son. "Mother," Samuel spoke, and signed simultaneously, his movements sharp with anger. "She deceived us. She used her knowledge of the deaf community to—" Nora's hand slapped the desk, cutting him off. Her signs were deliberate, fierce. "You're repeating your father's mistakes, jumping to conclusions, letting fear destroy trust. Your father did the same thing to me when he thought I was hiding things from him, and look what that cost us." Samuel flinched as if struck. "Marjorie!" he called out, knowing the house manager waited just outside. "Miss Jones is suspended until this matter is fully investigated. Please escort her to her room to pack." "Samuel, please." Eliana tried one last time, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ask yourself why this is coming out now, right after the gala, right after—" "That's enough." His words fell like a gavel. "I trusted you with my mother, with our family's reputation. I can't take chances." Nora reached for Eliana's hand, but Samuel stepped between them. "Mother, this is for your protection." The elderly woman's face crumpled in grief and anger. She turned away from her son, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Marjorie appeared at Eliana's elbow, somehow managing to look both sympathetic and satisfied. "This way, Miss Jones." The walk to her small room felt like a funeral procession. The mansion's halls, so recently filled with music and laughter, now echoed with emptiness. Eliana packed her few belongings mechanically, her Bible, her modest clothes, the sheet music Nora had given her. Through her window, she watched the sun set for the last time over the garden where she had first connected with Nora. The roses they had tended together swayed in the evening breeze, their petals closing against the approaching night. She spent hours writing and rewriting a note, trying to find words worthy of what Nora had meant to her. In the end, simplicity felt truest. On a piece of paper from Nora's cherished piano bench, she wrote, "Thank you for letting me be part of your song." Sleep eluded her that night. She lay awake listening to the old house settle, remembering the joy that had filled these rooms such a short time ago. Before dawn, she slipped from her bed and padded silently through the halls one last time. At Nora's door, she knelt to slide the note underneath. Her fingers lingered on the heavy wood, sending up a silent prayer for the woman who had become like a mother to her. From inside, she heard the soft rustle of movement, as if Nora too lay awake, held prisoner by grief. The sky was just beginning to lighten when Eliana walked down the mansion's front steps for the last time. Her small suitcase felt heavy with more than just clothes. It carried the weight of broken trust, of love cut short, of silence falling once again over a house that had so briefly known joy. As her taxi pulled away from the iron gates, the first rays of sun broke through the clouds, catching on the mansion's windows. They flickered like teardrops, a final farewell to the maid with the quiet soul who had dared to break the silence. The mansion felt different without Eliana, like someone had drawn thick curtains over the windows, dimming not just the light, but the very spirit of the house. The hallways that had recently echoed with laughter and piano music now carried only the sound of footsteps and silence. 3 days after Eliana's departure, Samuel sat in his office, staring at spreadsheets that refused to hold his attention. The soft tick of his expensive desk clock seemed to mock him, counting away seconds that felt increasingly heavy. Through his open door, he heard Marjorie's efficient steps approaching. "Mr. Hale," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Your mother hasn't touched her breakfast again. That's the 6th meal she's refused." Samuel pinched the bridge of his nose. "Has she at least taken her medication?" "She won't answer when I knock." Marjorie shifted uncomfortably. "She just sits by the window watching the garden." The garden, where Eliana and Nora had spent countless hours together, tending roses and sharing stories through flying fingers and gentle smiles. Samuel's chest tightened at the memory. "I'll check on her," he said, rising from his desk. The walk to his mother's wing of the house felt longer than usual. Family photographs lined the walls, moments frozen in time when smiles came easily and silence hadn't yet descended like a shroud. He paused before one showing his father at the piano, Nora leaning against him, both lost in music and each other. Outside his mother's door, Samuel knocked gently. When no response came, he entered anyway, finding Nora exactly as Marjorie had described. She sat in her favorite armchair, her elegant profile turned toward the window. The morning light cast shadows across her face, highlighting the new lines of sadness around her mouth. "Mother," he signed, moving into her line of sight. "You need to eat." Nora's hands remained still in her lap. Her eyes, when they met his, held such disappointment that Samuel had to look away. "Please," he signed, "you're worrying me." Finally her hands moved. One word, signed with devastating simplicity. "Faith." Samuel frowned. "What do you mean?" But Nora turned back to the window, clearly finished with the conversation. On her side table lay the sheet music for Amazing Grace, the margins filled with Eliana's neat handwriting, explaining the signs for each verse. That night, sleep eluded Samuel. He tossed in his king-sized bed, haunted by his mother's single-word message. Faith. The word followed him into his dreams, where he saw Eliana's face as he'd dismissed her. Hurt, yes, but also deeply disappointed, as if she'd expected better from him. At 3 o'clock in the morning, Samuel gave up on sleep. Pulling on his robe, he padded down to his office. The house felt different at night, more honest somehow, as if its shadows could speak truth better than daylight. He opened his laptop and began searching. First, he pulled up the article that had started it all. Reading it again, he noticed things he'd missed in his initial shock. The vagueness of the accusations, the careful way it implied wrongdoing without actually stating any facts. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he dug deeper. He found Eliana's employment history, the deaf children's school where she'd worked for 3 years before the scandal. Letters of recommendation practically glowed with praise for her gentle spirit and dedication. A link led him to a local veterans organization where Eliana had volunteered, teaching sign language to service members who'd lost their hearing. The coordinator's quote jumped out at him. "Miss Jones has a gift for healing more than just communication barriers. She brings light back to people who thought they'd lost their way." His throat tight, Samuel kept searching. In a buried news article, he finally found what he was looking for: the official investigation results. Eliana had been completely exonerated. The missing funds had been traced to a computer error, but by then, she'd already resigned to protect the school from negative publicity. "Oh, God," Samuel whispered into the dark office. The weight of his mistake pressed down on his chest until he could barely breathe. He'd done exactly what the world had done to her before: jumped to conclusions, assumed the worst, let fear override faith. As dawn began to paint the sky outside his window, Samuel made a decision. He reached for his phone and called his assistant. "Cancel everything today," he said. "All meetings, all calls, everything." "But sir, the board meeting, everything," he repeated firmly. He showered and dressed quickly, choosing casual clothes instead of his usual suit. In the kitchen, he found Marjorie already preparing breakfast. "I'm going into the city," he told her. "Please make sure Mother eats something." "Of course, Mr. Hale." She hesitated, then added, "Sir, about Miss Jones. Perhaps I was too hasty in bringing that article to your attention." Samuel looked at her sharply, but her face revealed nothing beyond professional concern. "Yes," he said quietly. "Perhaps we all were." The drive into Atlanta gave him time to think. He remembered how Eliana had transformed their lives, not just through sign language, but through her quiet strength and unwavering faith. She'd brought music back to their home, not just in piano notes, but in the rhythm of hands speaking love across silence. Traffic crawled through the city center as Samuel realized he had no idea where to find her. The diner. She'd mentioned working at a diner before coming to them. But which one? Atlanta had hundreds. He parked his car and walked into the first diner he saw, showing Eliana's picture to the waitress. No luck. The second diner brought the same result. By the fifth place, his expensive shoes were scuffed from walking, and his confidence was wavering. But his mother's word echoed in his mind. Faith. Samuel squared his shoulders and kept searching. He had to believe he would find her. Had to believe there was still time to make things right. The morning stretched into afternoon as he walked the city streets, determined to find the woman who had taught him and his mother how to speak with their hearts. Faith, his mother had signed. Now he understood. It wasn't just about believing in God, it was about believing in people, in second chances, in the power of love to bridge any silence. Samuel pulled out his phone once more, looking at the last photo he'd taken at the gala, Eliana signing beside his mother on stage, both of their faces glowing with joy. He'd let fear steal that joy from them all. But with faith, perhaps they could find it again. The sun climbed higher in the sky as Samuel continued his search, carrying the weight of regret and the hope of redemption in equal measure. His mother's empty gaze and single-word message drove him forward, one diner at a time, one step closer to making things right. Samuel's search through Atlanta's bustling streets led him to Eliana's former apartment building, a modest 3-story structure with faded brick walls and window boxes full of bright petunias. The landlady, a grandmotherly woman with silver hair, shook her head sadly when he showed her Eliana's photo. "Such a sweet girl, always helping carry my groceries," she said, adjusting her glasses. "But she moved out last week. Didn't leave a forwarding address." Samuel thanked her and headed back to his car, his expensive shoes scuffing against the cracked sidewalk. The late morning sun beat down as he drove across town to the deaf school where Eliana had once worked. The building stood proud despite its age, with cheerful murals decorating the walls and children's artwork displayed in the windows. Inside the office, a middle-aged administrator's eyes widened when Samuel introduced himself. "Miss Jones? Of course I remember her," she said, straightening papers on her desk. "One of the best teachers we ever had. Those children adored her." Her expression darkened. What happened to her was a terrible injustice. By the time we discovered the accounting error, the damage was already done. "Do you know where she might be now?" Samuel asked, his voice rough with regret. The administrator shook her head. "She still sends Christmas cards to some of the students, but that's all I know." Back in his car, Samuel loosened his tie and checked his phone. No messages from home, just silence. The same silence that had filled their lives before Eliana came. He couldn't let it return. His next stop was the diner where she'd worked before coming to the mansion. The bell above the door jingled as he entered, and the smell of coffee and fresh-baked pie filled the air. A few regulars looked up curiously at his expensive casual clothes, then returned to their meals. A waitress with graying hair and kind eyes approached. Her name tag read, "Betty." "Can I help you?" she asked, coffee pot in hand. Samuel showed her Eliana's picture. "I'm looking for her. She used to work here." Betty's face lit up with recognition. "Oh, Eliana, sweet girl. Always staying late to help clean up, never complained once." She glanced at Samuel more closely. "You're that rich fellow she worked for, aren't you?" Samuel nodded, fighting back shame. "I need to find her. It's important." Betty studied him for a long moment, as if weighing his sincerity. Finally, she set down her coffee pot. "She volunteers at the Community Hope Church on Wednesday afternoons. Teaches sign language to kids." She checked her watch. The class should be starting about now. Samuel's heart leaped. "Where's the church?" 3 blocks east, can't miss it. Big white steeple." Betty touched his arm. "You treat that girl right, you hear? She's got more goodness in her little finger than most folks have in their whole body." The church stood exactly where Betty had described, its white steeple reaching toward the cloudy sky. Samuel parked his car and sat for a moment, gathering his courage. Through the stained glass windows, he could see movement in the church hall. As he approached the side entrance, laughter spilled out. Pure, uninhibited children's laughter mixed with gentle encouragement. He peered through the doorway, and his breath caught in his throat. Eliana stood in front of a semicircle of children, her face animated as she demonstrated a sign. Her simple dress and cardigan were a far cry from the uniform she'd worn at the mansion, but her grace and warmth remained unchanged. The children watched her intently, their small hands moving in imitation. "That's right," she praised, her voice carrying to where Samuel stood. "Now, let's learn how to sign love. This is a very special word." She demonstrated the sign, crossing her arms over her chest, hands in fists. The children copied her, giggling as they practiced. Samuel watched, mesmerized. by the joy in her expression, the patience in her movements. Then she turned slightly, and their eyes met. The laughter faded. The children looked between them curiously as Eliana froze, her hands dropping to her sides. Samuel stepped into the room, his heart pounding so hard he could barely breathe. Slowly, carefully, he raised his hands. The signs were clumsy, unpracticed, but clear. "I'm sorry. We hear you now." Tears welled in Eliana's eyes, spilling down her cheeks. Her hands trembled as she signed back, "I forgive you." The distance between them vanished in a few quick steps. Samuel wrapped his arms around her, holding her close as she cried quietly against his shoulder. Around them, the children began to clap, their small hands creating a percussion of joy and hope. One little girl tugged at Eliana's dress. "Miss Eliana, is he your prince?" Eliana laughed through her tears, pulling back to look at Samuel. The forgiveness in her eyes humbled him, made him want to be worthy of her grace. "Can you teach us another word?" a boy asked eagerly. "In a minute?" Eliana said, wiping her eyes. She turned to Samuel. "You came looking for me." "I found the truth," he said softly. "About the school, about everything. I should have trusted you. Should have had faith." He glanced at the children. "Will you come back? Mother misses you. I miss you." Before Eliana could answer, the same little girl spoke up again. "Miss Eliana can't leave. She's teaching us to talk with our hands." "Maybe," Eliana said gently. "I could do both." She looked at Samuel questioningly. "Both?" he agreed immediately. "Anything you want. Just please come home." The word home hung between them, full of promise. Eliana turned to her students. "Would you like to learn one more special sign before we finish today?" The children nodded enthusiastically. "This," she demonstrated, her eyes meeting Samuel's, "is the sign for family." The children copied her, their small hands forming the sign. Samuel joined them, his heart full as Eliana beamed at him through happy tears. In that moment, surrounded by the innocent joy of children learning to speak with their hands, he understood what his mother had been trying to tell him all along. Sometimes the most important things in life couldn't be heard with ears, but only with the heart. The late afternoon sun painted long shadows across the winding driveway as Samuel's car approached the Hale mansion. Eliana sat quietly in the passenger seat, her hands folded in her lap, watching the familiar landscape roll past. The manicured gardens and stately trees felt both foreign and familiar after her absence. "She's been watching for you," Samuel said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "Every afternoon, Mother sits by the window in the parlor, just waiting." Eliana's heart squeezed with emotion. "I've missed her too. So much." The car rounded the final curve, and the mansion came into full view. There, just as Samuel had said, a figure stood at the grand entrance. Nora Hale's silver hair caught the golden light, her posture straight and eager as she watched their approach. Samuel parked the car, and before he could fully stop, Nora was already hurrying down the steps, her usual grace forgotten in her excitement. Eliana barely had time to step out of the car before Nora reached her, wrapping her in a fierce embrace. When they finally pulled apart, Nora's hands moved with trembling urgency. "Welcome home, daughter." Tears spilled down Eliana's cheeks as she signed back. "I'm so happy to be here." Samuel stood nearby, watching the reunion with glistening eyes. When Nora beckoned him closer, he joined them without hesitation, completing their circle. For a long moment, they simply held each other, their shared tears speaking volumes that no words, signed or spoken, could express. Marjorie appeared in the doorway, her usual stern expression softened by the scene before her. "Dinner is ready," she announced, then added with unexpected warmth, "Welcome back, Miss Jones." They made their way inside, Nora refusing to let go of Eliana's hand. The familiar scent of lemon polish and fresh flowers wrapped around them like a welcome embrace. In the dining room, the table was set with the fine china usually reserved for special occasions, crystal glasses catching the light from the chandelier. As they settled into their seats, Samuel cleared his throat. The normally confident businessman looked almost nervous as he stood, commanding attention from both women. "Before we begin," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I need to say something." He turned to face Eliana directly. "I failed you. When those accusations surfaced, I let fear and old wounds cloud my judgment. Instead of trusting the person who brought light back into our home, I pushed you away. I'm deeply sorry." His hands moved carefully as he signed along with his words, wanting to ensure his mother understood every word. Eliana noticed his signing had improved. He must have been practicing during her absence. Then he turned to Nora. "And Mother." His hands trembled slightly as he signed. "I owe you an even greater apology. For years, I blamed you for the silence between us. I thought you'd chosen to shut me out after Father died." Nora's eyes welled with tears as she watched her son's hands form the words she'd waited so long to see. Samuel continued, his voice growing stronger. "I was wrong. So terribly wrong. And I'm sorry for every minute I spent nursing that bitterness instead of trying to understand." Nora's hands moved with gentle urgency as she responded, Eliana translating softly for Samuel's benefit. "My beautiful boy, I never stopped loving you. Not for a single moment. The stroke that took my hearing the night your father died, it took my voice too for a while. By the time I could communicate again, shame had built a wall between us. I didn't know how to break through it." Samuel knelt beside his mother's chair, taking her hands in his. "Then let's tear it down together," he signed, his movements deliberate and clear. Nora pulled him close, pressing a kiss to his forehead as tears rolled down her cheeks. The simple gesture held years of longing, of love held back by misunderstanding and pride. Eliana watched them, her own vision blurring with tears. The warmth in the room felt tangible, like sunlight breaking through clouds after a long winter storm. This was what healing looked like. Not a sudden miracle, but a gentle thawing, a slow return to light and life. As they began their meal, the conversation flowed naturally, a mix of signs and spoken words. Nora shared stories about Samuel's childhood, her hands painting pictures of a little boy who loved to climb trees and play piano with her. Samuel, in turn, told them about his search for Eliana, making them laugh with his description of Betty at the diner and her protective interrogation. "The children at the church," Samuel said, signing as he spoke. "They adore you, Eliana. I've never seen anything quite like it." Eliana blushed. "They're wonderful students, so eager to learn." Nora's hands moved excitedly. "You must continue teaching them. Perhaps we could host some classes here, in the music room." The suggestion lit up Eliana's face. "Really? You wouldn't mind?" "Mind?" Samuel translated his mother's rapid signing. "This house has been silent for too long. It's time to fill it with children's laughter again." As the evening progressed, they moved to the parlor. Without prompting, Nora went to the piano, lifting the cover from the keys. Her fingers moved across them with growing confidence, playing the opening notes of Amazing Grace. Eliana and Samuel stood on either side of her, their hands moving in harmony as they signed the lyrics. The music filled the room, but it was more than just sound. It was the language of reconciliation, of hope restored, of love that had finally found its voice. The melody drifted through the mansion's halls, replacing the echoes of past silence with promises of tomorrow. Outside, the sun set in a blaze of color, as if nature itself was celebrating the healing taking place within these walls. When the last note faded, Nora reached out, taking one of their hands in each of hers. Her expression held such joy, such peace, that words weren't necessary. In that moment, they were more than employer and employee, more than mother and son. They were family, bound together by something stronger than blood. The courage to forgive, the willingness to begin again, and the faith that love could bridge any silence. The spring sunlight poured through the newly installed floor-to-ceiling windows of the Hale Estate's east wing, casting warm patterns across the freshly painted walls. What had once been unused guest rooms and dusty storage spaces now buzzed with purpose and energy. Construction workers moved efficiently through the halls, putting finishing touches on what would soon become the Hale Center for Hearing and Hope. Eliana stood in what would be the main reception area, clipboard in hand, checking off items from her seemingly endless to-do list. Her simple navy dress and practical flats reflected her new role. No longer just a housekeeper, but a woman with a mission. The transformation of the space mirrored her own journey, from quiet maid to confident leader. "Miss Jones!" called out one of the workers, signing as he spoke, something that brought a smile to her face every time. "Where do you want these classroom signs installed?" She walked over, examining the beautiful wooden plaques that would mark each learning space. "Let's make sure they're at eye level for both adults and children," she demonstrated with her hands. "And remember, every sign needs to have both text and braille." The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of activity. When Samuel first announced his plans to convert part of the estate into a center for the deaf and hard of hearing, Eliana had been stunned. But his vision was clear, and his determination unwavering. "It's time we turned our family's story into something bigger," he had said during the initial planning meeting. "Something that can help others find their voice." Now, as she walked through the nearly completed center, Eliana marveled at how quickly dreams could become reality when backed by passion and resources. The classrooms were equipped with the latest technology for teaching sign language. The therapy rooms were designed with perfect acoustics for those learning to work with hearing aids. Even the color scheme had been carefully chosen, soft, calming tones that wouldn't interfere with visual communication. "Looking professional, co-director Jones?" Samuel's voice came from behind her, warm with affection. He handed her a steaming cup of coffee. 2 sugars, just how she liked it. "Thank you," she signed while accepting the cup, making him chuckle. "Always multitasking," he teased, his own hands moving more confidently now after weeks of dedicated practice. "Mother's been asking for you. She's in the music room, working on the piece for tomorrow's ceremony." They walked together through the connecting corridor that linked the main house to the new center. Samuel's hand found its way to the small of her back, a gesture that had become wonderfully familiar. In the music room, Nora sat at the grand piano, her fingers dancing across the keys with renewed vigor. The music she played was her own composition, a piece that would officially open the center tomorrow. When she noticed them enter, her face lit up with joy. "How's it coming along?" Eliana signed. Nora's hands moved excitedly. "Almost perfect. This piece needs to tell our story, all of our stories." Samuel watched his mother with evident pride. The past months had transformed her from a reclusive woman into someone who radiated purpose. Her involvement in the center had given her a new lease on life. "The staff training is going well," Eliana reported, signing as she spoke. "Everyone's committed to learning sign language. Even the maintenance team can handle basic conversations now. That's because they have an excellent teacher," Samuel interjected, giving Eliana a meaningful look. though I still say you're basically running this whole operation. The real CEO. Eliana blushed, but stood her ground. Co-director is perfect for me. Besides, this center needs both worlds, your business expertise and our understanding of the deaf community. Nora nodded approvingly, her hands moving. That's what makes this place special. It's not just about teaching sign language or providing services, it's about building bridges. The afternoon wore on as they finalized details for the opening ceremony. Community outreach programs were reviewed, schedules confirmed, and last-minute adjustments made to the presentation. Eliana had designed programs that would serve everyone from young children to elderly adults learning to cope with hearing loss. As evening approached, Samuel suggested they take one final walk through the finished center. The workers had left for the day, leaving the spaces quiet and pristine. Hand in hand, they moved through each room, their footsteps echoing softly on the new floors. Remember when this was just a storage room? Samuel asked, pausing in what was now a state-of-the-art computer lab. Full of old furniture and my father's fishing gear. Eliana squeezed his hand. Now it's going to help people connect with their world in new ways. They continued their tour, stopping in the children's area where colorful murals depicted both signed and written alphabets. The resource library was stocked with books on deaf culture, sign language, and inspirational stories of people overcoming hearing challenges. I never thought I'd be doing something like this, Samuel admitted as they stood in the main hall. Running a business, making money, that I understood. But this, he gestured to the space around them. This feels different. Different how? Eliana asked, turning to face him. More meaningful, I suppose. When I see Mother teaching piano to deaf children, watching them feel the vibrations of the music. Or when I think about families coming here, finding hope like we did. He paused, collecting his thoughts. It makes all the success I've had seem small in comparison. Eliana understood completely. Her own journey from teaching at the deaf school to this moment felt both surprising and inevitable. Sometimes the best things in life come from unexpected places. She signed, speaking softly. Samuel caught her hands in his, holding them close to his heart. Like a quiet maid who changed everything. They stood there in the fading light, surrounded by the promise of tomorrow. Through the windows, they could see Nora in the garden, directing the setup for tomorrow's outdoor reception area. Her hands moved gracefully as she instructed the workers, her confidence a testament to how far they'd all come. We should probably go help your mother, Eliana said finally, though she made no move to step away. Probably, Samuel agreed, but instead of letting go, he pulled her closer. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For showing us how to listen with our hearts. The last rays of sunset painted the walls in soft gold, a fitting end to their final day of preparation. Tomorrow, the Hale Center for Hearing and Hope would open its doors, ready to share its light with others who needed it. But for now, in this quiet moment, Eliana and Samuel simply stood together, grateful for the strange providence that had brought them to this place, this purpose, this love. Dawn broke over the Hale Center with golden promise. The morning air buzzed with anticipation as staff members made final preparations for the grand opening. Fresh flowers adorned every corner, their sweet fragrance mingling with the smell of coffee and freshly baked pastries set out for the guests. Eliana stood before the mirror in her office, adjusting her navy blue blazer. Her hands trembled slightly as she practiced the signs she would use during the ceremony. The weight of the moment pressed upon her, not from fear, but from the profound understanding of what this day meant for so many. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Nora entered, elegant in a silver dress that caught the morning light. Her face glowed with excitement as she signed, Are you ready, dear? Eliana nodded, signing back. Just nervous. This feels like a dream. Nora's hands moved gracefully. Dreams become real when we dare to believe in them. Together, they walked through the polished halls of the center. Already the parking lot was filling with cars. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky. Camera crews set up their equipment while reporters checked their microphones. In the main hall, Samuel directed the final arrangements, his usual business attire softened by a warm smile. When he spotted Eliana and his mother, he crossed the room to join them. "The piano has been tuned twice," he reported, signing simultaneously for his mother's benefit. "And the sound system is perfect." Nora patted his cheek affectionately. "The piano will sing just fine." She signed. Music comes from the heart, not the tuning. As the morning progressed, guests began arriving in steady streams. Local officials, community leaders, families from the deaf community, and curious citizens filled the rows of chairs. The excitement was palpable, a current of energy that seemed to pulse through the room. At precisely 10 o'clock, Samuel stepped onto the stage. The crowd hushed as he approached the microphone. "Welcome," he began, his hands moving in sync with his words, a detail that brought proud tears to Nora's eyes. "Today marks not just the opening of a building, but the beginning of a journey that started in my own home, with my own mother, and one remarkable woman who taught us all to listen with our hearts." From her position near the piano, Eliana felt her cheeks warm. She watched the audience, noting how many were already signing along with Samuel's words. Children sat cross-legged in the front row, their eyes wide with wonder. Elderly couples held hands, some with hearing aids visible, others signing to each other in quiet conversation. The moment arrived for Nora's performance. She walked to the piano with dignified grace, her silver dress catching the stage lights. As she settled onto the bench, her fingers hovering over the keys, a profound silence fell over the room. The first notes of "Amazing Grace" filled the air, each one played with deliberate tenderness. Though Nora couldn't hear the music herself, years of muscle memory and the vibrations beneath her fingers guided her. Her face showed complete peace as she played. Eliana stepped forward, her hands rising to sign the lyrics. Her movements were fluid and emotional, translating not just the words but the very soul of the hymn. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. Her hands spoke, and hundreds of eyes followed her gestures. From the wings, Samuel watched, his heart full to bursting. His mother, once isolated in silence, now created music that touched hundreds. Eliana, whom he had once misjudged, now stood as a beacon of grace and understanding. Together, they embodied everything the center represented: healing, connection, and the boundless power of love. Photographers captured the scene. Nora at the piano, her face serene. Eliana signing with passionate elegance. The audience captivated by this unique duet of sound and silence. Many in the crowd signed along, their hands rising and falling like gentle waves. As the final notes faded, there was a moment of perfect stillness. Then the audience rose as one, their applause thunderous. Those who couldn't hear showed their appreciation with raised hands, waving in the air, the deaf community's version of applause. Nora stood from the piano, tears streaming down her face. Eliana moved to her side, and they embraced as the applause continued. Samuel joined them, wrapping them both in a tight hug before stepping to the microphone once more. "This center," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "began because one quiet woman decided to listen with her heart." He glanced at Eliana, their eyes meeting across the stage. "She taught us that true communication goes beyond words or sounds. It lives in patience, in understanding, and in love." The crowd rose again, their appreciation overwhelming. Eliana, overcome with emotion, turned to the audience and signed a simple, "Thank you." Her hands shook slightly, but her movements were clear and heartfelt. When she turned back to Samuel, her eyes glistening with tears, he responded with the sign they had all come to cherish: faith. His fingers formed the gesture with practiced care, imbuing it with all the meaning that had brought them to this moment. The applause continued, washing over them in waves. Nora beamed at her son and the woman who had helped heal their family. Reporters scribbled in notebooks and cameras flashed, capturing this triumph of love over silence, of understanding over isolation. In that moment, as hundreds of people celebrated together, the true mission of the Hale Center for Hearing and Hope became clear. It wasn't just about teaching sign language or providing services. It was about building bridges between worlds, about finding ways to hear with the heart when ears couldn't suffice. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawns of the Hale estate, 3 figures settled into comfortable wicker chairs on the sprawling veranda. The day's excitement had transformed into a peaceful evening, filled with the gentle sounds of volunteers chatting and laughing in the gardens below. Eliana watched as young people taught each other sign language near the rose bushes, their hands moving with enthusiasm. Some wore hearing aids, others signed fluently, but all shared bright smiles and genuine connection. The sight warmed her heart, reminding her how far they'd come from those first quiet days in the mansion. Nora sat in her favorite chair, her eyes closed in contentment as she hummed a melody she could no longer hear. The sound, though slightly off-key, carried more beauty than any perfect symphony. It was the sound of healing, of a spirit set free. Her silver hair caught the evening light, creating a soft halo around her peaceful face. Samuel watched his mother with tender amazement, still adjusting to these precious moments of joy. He reached over and placed his hand gently over Eliana's, where it rested on the armrest between them. The simple gesture spoke volumes about their journey together. "Look at them all," Samuel said, signing simultaneously as he spoke, a habit he'd developed over the past months. "I never imagined the center would bring so much life to this place." Eliana smiled, her free hand moving gracefully as she signed for Nora's benefit. "God works in mysterious ways," she replied. "Sometimes the quietest beginnings lead to the loudest celebrations." The sky painted itself in breathtaking shades of rose and gold, clouds drifting like silk scarves caught in a gentle breeze. The garden's flowers seemed to glow in the evening light, their colors intensified by the setting sun. "We should expand the children's program," Samuel mused, his businessman's mind never fully at rest. "There's such a need for early intervention services." His hands moved confidently now, no longer the clumsy gestures of a beginner. Nora's eyes sparkled as she joined the conversation, her signing elegant and precise. "And music therapy. The vibrations help them feel connected to sound. Perhaps we could add a scholarship program too," Eliana suggested, her heart racing slightly as Samuel's thumb traced small circles on her hand. "For students who want to become interpreters or teachers." They fell into comfortable discussion about the future, their dreams growing bigger with each passing moment. Samuel spoke of satellite centers in other cities, while Eliana described outreach programs for rural communities. Nora watched them both, her smile knowing and maternal. As they talked, Samuel's eyes kept drifting to Eliana's face, catching the way the evening light played across her features. There was something else he wanted to discuss, something involving a small velvet box hidden in his desk drawer. But that conversation could wait for another perfect moment. From inside the mansion, piano music drifted through the open windows. One of the volunteers was playing, the melody of Amazing Grace floating on the evening breeze. The song had become an unofficial anthem of the center, a reminder of their shared journey. Nora straightened in her chair, her face glowing with maternal pride as she signed, "Silence isn't empty. It's full of love when God fills it." Eliana nodded, feeling profound peace settle over her heart. She understood now that silence could be as rich as any symphony when filled with understanding and grace. The mansion that had once felt so cold and empty now vibrated with life, love, and purpose. The evening deepened around them, stars beginning to peek through the darkening sky. Below in the gardens, volunteers were starting to pack up for the day, their laughter and conversation carrying up to the veranda. Some waved goodbye to the family, signing thank you as they departed. Nora closed her eyes again, resuming her gentle humming. The sound mixed with the piano music and the evening breeze, creating a symphony that needed no ears to be heard, only hearts to be felt. Samuel and Eliana exchanged glances, their fingers still intertwined, both marveling at how God had woven their lives together in such unexpected ways. This was more than just a happy ending. It was a beautiful beginning. The mansion of silence had transformed into a home where faith echoed through every corridor, where love spoke louder than words, and where the sound of hope resided permanently in every heart. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.